The sun clung to every inch of the checkpoint like a heavy, scorching hand, turning the cracked concrete into a blistering griddle that shimmered with heat waves. A few bored guards lounged under a makeshift canopy of torn canvas, fanning their necks with scraps of paper, rifles propped carelessly nearby. Beyond them sprawled the rest of the installation, vast training yards littered with obstacle rigs, squat beige barracks with chipped paint, and further still, hulking towers bristling with antennae that cut jagged lines across the searing sky. Engines rumbled from distant trucks ferrying crates, the air thick with the acrid blend of diesel, sweat, and sunburned metal. The battered jeep rattled up, coughing plumes of dust that made one of the guards curse and shield his eyes. Its exterior was a storybook of scrapes and rust patches, the bumper lashed on by a desperate twist of wire that had long given up trying to stay hidden. The vehicle stuttered to a stop, then went silent with a resigned huff, as if grateful to be done. From the driver's seat, a woman climbed out, slender, perhaps in her late 30s, her shoulders set with a quiet, enduring strength. Her faded cargo pants bore old grass stains and patches that didn't quite match, and her sun-bleached jacket hung loose, sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned arms that looked as though they'd hauled more crates than delicate hands should. A plain canvas backpack was slung across one shoulder, frayed at the seams, a stubborn patch on the bottom corner testifying to hard miles. Her boots were scuffed almost white at the toes, their laces mismatched, knotted so many times they looked like small nests. She adjusted the pack with a subtle roll of her shoulder, eyes shaded beneath lashes lowered against the blistering glare. Her hair was a dark chestnut, tied back in a tight, unfussy knot that left her neck exposed to the punishing sun. As she approached the checkpoint, a young corporal straightened up with a sly smirk, tugging at one corner of his mouth. He looked her over with a practiced arrogance, boots planted wide, hands hooked casually in his belt. "You lost, ma'am," he called, voice dripping false politeness. "Kitchen staff's down by the mess hall. You look ready to scrub pots, not much else." A lanky private next to him let out a snort, unable to contain his amusement. His gaze dipped pointedly to the frayed pack. "Damn, she dragged that out to a junk heap. That thing looks like it's held together by wishful thinking." Elena paused just before them, fishing into her back pocket for a dog-eared badge encased in cracked plastic. Without raising her head, she extended it patiently, fingers steady despite the tension rising around them. The corporal took it with exaggerated caution, squinting at the faded print, then tossed it back like it was a used napkin. "Civilian clearance, huh? Logistics, figures." He nodded toward the interior of the camp, half smiling. "Try not to trip over anything important." The private's chuckles followed her as she walked through, their mocking eyes lingering on her retreating figure. Past the checkpoint, the compound unfolded into a bustling artery of military life. Clusters of recruits jogged by in loose formations, sweat streaking their temples, instructors barking hoarse commands that cut sharp across the heavy air. Others sprawled near supply trucks, gulping from canteens, their laughter rolling out in sudden bursts. As Eleanor moved along the main path, eyes trailed her, some indifferent, but many narrowed, a few accompanied by hushed jabs of elbows and quick muttered words. Her clothes, her battered gear, all made her stand out like an errant weed in rows of precisely trimmed hedges. Two recruits near a shaded bench leaned closer to watch her pass, one with an oily grin twisting his lips. "Probably here to count rations or fold towels," he whispered, not quite low enough. The other just laughed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe the absurdity on display. Further along, a knot of junior officers paused in their review of a large clipboard, one raising an eyebrow as he took in her appearance before returning to his briefing with a dismissive flick of the hand. Through all of it, Eleanor kept her eyes on the ground just a few steps ahead, her hands folded lightly over the worn strap of her pack. Her breathing was calm, unhurried, her boots setting down with quiet precision that almost seemed deliberate. Each stride held a centered assurance, a stillness beneath the surface that didn't match the picture of a timid civilian scurrying through unfamiliar terrain. It was there, in that subtle, unflinching way she carried her weathered backpack and let the sneers slide off without a murmur, that the first tremors of something deeper began to coil, unnoticed by most, like a fault line waiting patiently under sun-baked earth. The command hall buzzed with restless energy, the air thick with voices layered over the mechanical hum of projectors. Digital maps flickered across wide screens at the front of the room, sprawling tactical layouts annotated with bright pulsing markers. Rows of recruits hunched over shared desks, some furiously jotting notes, others elbowing each other and whispering conspiratorially. The scent of instant coffee and metal filings drifted lazily through the hall, colliding with the sharper tang of sweat from bodies pressed too close under buzzing lights. Eleanor stepped quietly through the doorway, her boots scuffing against the worn floor tiles. She scanned for an unclaimed patch of wall, settling in a discreet corner away from the knots of trainees and officers. With practiced care, she lowered her canvas backpack beside her foot. The pack slumped against the baseboard with a dull sigh, one battered strap curling like a tired limb. Eleanor folded her hands loosely, her gaze drifting to the animated overlays of terrain and convoy routes, her expression untroubled by the jostling crowd. That small island of calm didn't last. A sharp laugh cracked through the din, followed by the scraping drag of boots across tile. A lieutenant swaggered into view, clean-shaven jaw set in a self-satisfied tilt, the bars on his collar gleaming. He hooked his thumbs into his belt, head cocked slightly as he studied her. "Well, would you look at this?" he drawled loud enough for several nearby to tune in. "Thought this was a tactical briefing, not a lost and found. Who let the supply closet wander in?" A ripple of laughter rolled outward from his small circle. Someone else piped up, "Bet she's here to sweep up when we're done." Eleanor didn't flinch, simply kept her hands folded, eyes half-lidded in a quiet observation that seemed to needle them more than any comeback might have. The lieutenant's smirk widened at the challenge of her composure. He took a leisurely step closer, bending slightly at the waist. "Hey, logistics, you miss your laundry route? Or are you here to hand out mop buckets?" Before Eleanor could answer, not that she seemed inclined, a female sergeant with a shaved stripe down the side of her scalp sauntered over, unwrapping a ration bar. She eyed Eleanor's clothes, then with a small mocking smile dropped the bar at her feet. "Here, for the hungry civilian. Looks like you could use it." More snickers. Eleanor bent smoothly, picked up the bar and gave a small polite nod of thanks. The gesture, far from soothing them, only poured fuel on their sneers. "Oh, she's so proper," someone giggled. "Must be her big day out of the warehouse." A heavy shuffle cut through their mirth. A burly instructor with forearms like bundled rebar stepped into their circle, clipboard clutched in one meaty hand. His eyes narrowed on Elena's bag. No barcode ID tag. Regulation says all gear inside the hall's got to be cleared and scanned. His grin was wolfish. "Let's have a look, sweetheart. Open it up." Elena's voice was steady, barely above the din, yet impossibly clear. "Without a formal requisition, I have the right to decline a personal search." That drew outright laughter. The instructor tilted his head, feigning concern. "Oh, she's quoting code at us. That's cute." He dropped the clipboard to slap against his thigh. "Boys, give her a hand." Hands grabbed the pack. The zipper hissed in sharp, ugly jerks as they pried it open. Out tumbled worn socks, rolled into small, misshapen balls. A thin, battered notebook flopped out, pages ruffling with the draft from an overhead fan. A small folding knife slid across the tile, coming to rest by the lieutenant's polished boot. "Well, that's adorable," he crowed, poking the socks with his toe. "Packing for a slumber party." The laughter grew, rising to fill the hall, pulling in recruits from the nearest rows. A few craned their necks to get a better look, chuckles buzzing in their throats. The instructor dug deeper, pushing aside cloth and crinkled old receipts. His hand landed on something dense, a corner of fabric folded with deliberate precision. When he pulled it free, the room seemed to exhale all at once. The uniform was black, a depthless, absolute black that seemed to swallow the light. Embroidered on the shoulder was a white wraith skull, its eye sockets hollow and endless, pierced through by twin crimson blades that crossed behind it like a seal of death. The instructor's face drained of color, the folded garment sagging in his trembling hands. Murmurs broke like fragile glass, recruits pulling back so abruptly that chairs scraped in unison. Somewhere near the front, a pen rolled off a desk and clattered onto the floor, the small sound impossibly loud in the sudden hush. The lieutenant's mouth opened, closed, then opened again, a soft wheeze escaping like a punctured lung. The sergeant who tossed the ration bar actually stumbled a step backward, her hands lifting slightly as though to ward off a striking ghost. And all Elena did was tilt her head slightly, her eyes calm, watching as the power shifted in the room, slow and inexorable as a tide rolling in, swallowing every trace of their ridicule. The hall still quivered with the ghost of laughter, the edges of cruel smiles lingering on faces that hadn't yet realized they were standing on the brink of their own disgrace. That dark uniform, cradled awkwardly in the instructor's large hands, seemed to pull all sound into it. Its black fabric drank the bright lights overhead until the skull and blades insignia appeared to hover, stark and menacing, in the stale air. At the back of the hall, the heavy doors swung inward on a tired groan. A decorated base commander stepped in, boots clicking smartly on the tile, medals winking on his chest with each stride. His hair was gunmetal grey, clipped close, his face lined from years that hadn't softened him. He carried a slim folder under one arm, half turned to an aide who spoke quickly at his side. Whatever routine concern had just occupied his mind disintegrated the instant his eyes snagged on that folded uniform. He stopped dead, the folder sliding from his grip and slapping against the floor, papers fanning out in a careless scatter. The aide reached to retrieve it, but froze too when he saw the commander's face blanch. Colour sluiced from the older man's cheeks in a wave, leaving behind an ashen pallor that made the thin lines of old scars stand out in sharp relief. His mouth worked for a moment, as though trying to shape a question he no longer dared to voice. Then, without any prompting, his legs bent and he dropped to one knee. The crack of his kneecap meeting tile sounded painful, and his gloved hand actually trembled where it braced against the ground. It was as if a silent cannon had gone off in the room. Officers nearby turned to see what had drawn such a reaction. Eyes darted to the insignia, widened, then darted back to one another in desperate search of denial. But there was none to be found. One by one, like dominoes tipping under an invisible hand, they lowered themselves. Knees struck floor in a staggered chorus. A colonel's breath hitched audibly as he went down, lips moving in a muttered prayer that nobody could quite catch. Younger recruits looked from face to face, confusion painted broad and stark across their features. But tradition and instinct, that deep, drilled-in fear of legacy and legend, shoved them down too. Some stumbled clumsily, hands splayed, brows knit, eyes darting. The tile soon vanished under a sea of bowed heads and braced palms. Closer to Elena, the once swaggering lieutenant seemed to wilt where he stood, shoulders hitching toward his ears, sweat glistening at his hairline. His throat bobbed on a swallow he couldn't finish. Beside him, the female sergeant who had tossed the ration bar took a small, shuffling step back, one hand lifting toward her mouth. Her eyes shone with a slick panic, and the cruel humor from earlier had been entirely scraped out of her expression, leaving only raw fear in its place. Amid this silent collapse, Elena moved with a calm that might have been mistaken for indifference, if not for the careful reverence of her hands. She stepped forward, and the instructor who still clutched the uniform, startled so badly his grip loosened. She caught the garment before it fell, smoothing its rich black folds with a measured swipe of her palm. Then, with the same patient precision one might use to fold a national flag at a funeral, she tucked it back into her battered pack. Each crease fell into place with exacting care, her movements drawing the eyes of every person now kneeling in that echoing hall. She didn't spare them so much as a tight smile. No nod of victory, no crowing over their submission. Just that quiet, rooted composure. An unspoken gravity that now pressed on their shoulders far more heavily than any superior's reprimand could. When she lifted the pack by its straps, the frayed canvas seemed somehow transformed by the presence of what lay hidden inside. She turned to leave, her boots making soft sounds against the floor that seemed impossibly loud in the suffocating hush. Just as she reached the threshold of the door, the commander's voice broke, rough and hoarse, like it had clawed its way out of his chest. "Wraith Division, Lieutenant Commander Ward." The words tumbled into the open space with the solemn weight of a sealed verdict, crashing over every kneeling figure and rewriting each petty judgment they had formed in ugly, careless whispers. Elena didn't pause, didn't break stride. She stepped through the doorway and was swallowed by the corridor beyond. In her wake, the dust she'd stirred curled lazily through shafts of light, wrapping around still-bent heads. The hall remained a tableau of stunned bodies and stricken faces, each pair of eyes blinking toward the empty doorway with dawning horror. Long after the last whisper of her passing faded, they stayed exactly as they were, kneeling, pale and chastened, held in place by the revelation of who they had dared to try and break.